talk about regret and remorse. Generally, I'd have a discussion with you guys. We'd define the terms. Somehow this model doesn't make that easy. But we could ask ourselves, what's the difference between regret and remorse? What is regret? What is remorse? It was rhetorical. It was just for impact. But as long as you raised your hand, Jacob.
Regret is wishing you did something different than what you did.
Regret is wishing you did something different, okay.
And then remorse is feeling bad about past actions.
Okay, how are those two things different? Like, if you feel remorse, will you wish you did things different? If you feel bad about your past actions and you're not a total jerk, actually not even let's say you are a total jerk, but let's say you're not a sociopath and you feel bad about your past actions, isn't that tantamount or equivalent to saying you wish you'd done something different?
Regret, you might not be feeling bad about it, you just think that maybe a better action could have been taken.
Does the word regret indicate a lack of any feeling? Like the way we use the word regret in the English language, does it indicate a lack of feeling? Is regret synonymous with an awareness that a mistake has been committed? Like you say, I regret that action. Is that a cognitive thing, or is it just is it a feeling, or is it just a computational effect? Do you follow?
Yeah.
You see how your definition failed? It failed because there was too much overlap between the two terms so that they became almost synonymous. You used different language to describe each one, but you weren't aware that the words you used to describe implied the other language. Do you follow? Did you guys? Does that make sense? All right. But the problem is for them to hear what we just did, I have to repeat every single thing you said verbatim because it's a live thing where I picked up on subtle distinctions. And so without them hearing you and everything you said, and even the facial expressions and everything else, they're left semi-blind, just hearing one side of the conversation. For this reason, I said, I'm just being rhetorical. What is regret? What is remorse? How are they the same? How are they different? Are they good emotions to have? What do you do with them when they come up? I think these are important questions. If only because most people experience regret and remorse regularly in their lives. And so to have some kind of playbook or some kind of map has a lot of benefit. Do I have your attention? I'm short on time. It took me an hour and a half to get here, and man, did I drive crazy. The 405 was a parking lot. There must have been an accident, but it was 0 miles an hour, bumper to bumper. At a certain point I said, I'm just getting off the freeway, so I just went almost like at a 90-degree angle. And it just so happened that right when I did that, there was a little thing that led you onto like a dirt road off the 405. And I couldn't tell where it went, and I just said, I'm just going for it. So I put into all-wheel drive, and I 4x4'd it, just rocked this whole thing. And it let me out, And then I had this, and then I just get out of that, and then I got here, but it was a whole thing. It would have been another half an hour had I not done what I did. Normally it takes me less than 40 minutes to get here. It was an hour and a half, so it was more than double the regular time. So we're going to be tight. We're going to be neat and tidy, double lively, as they say in British English. And so let's pay close attention, and we're going to move through this quickly. Linda, you paying attention? Okay. All right. Okay. If you look up the terms in a dictionary, regret and remorse are synonymous. In any thesaurus, they're synonyms. And if you look, I looked at 3 or 4 dictionaries. I mean, this was some time ago, but I looked at 3 or 4 dictionaries, and remorse was deep regret. Now, if you look at the way the terms are defined by some psychologists, I'll even go as far as to say most psychologists, remorse is considered to be more genuine. You guys are familiar with the cluster B personality disorders? Sure you are. Sociopaths are antisocial personality disorder. And narcissists, not like you're a narcissist, you spent too long looking in the mirror. Like you're a narcissist, you actually have a major personality disorder. Those 2 personality disorders are characterized by a low capacity for empathy. You don't feel for other people. One of the critical lines of demarcation between normal people and people with a low capacity for empathy is that people with a low capacity for empathy can feel regret, which means I did something and it affected me in a negative way. Therefore, I don't want to do it again. I've known a few sociopaths in my life. Most sociopaths aren't violent criminals, but they all lack the ability to empathize. And when you counsel a sociopath, you have to make it all about them. It should give you a sensationalizing. Don't stab people in the throat because then you'll get your TV privileges taken away. You like having your TV privileges. Right? And they're like, yeah. And you're like, okay, so don't stab people because if you do, what's going to happen? Oh, okay, and that's not good. You follow? Children have a very limited capacity for empathy. My daughter, somehow unusually strong for her age. Sometimes she'll crack me over the head with something. Like just come up behind me and just crack me with a stick or something like that. And I'll be like, ow! And then she'll start crying. Like she whacks me. I'm like, I got a bruise now. And she's like, and I go, oh! And I'm like writhing around like in pain. And then she'll like get all bent. She'll start crying. I'll be, it's okay. And I have to like pretend I'm all right and I'm not concussed or something like that because she just can't cope with anybody else not, being like, kids have a low capacity for empathy. You've learned this, right? As a preschool teacher? It's almost like having a bunch of sociopaths, Yeah. Like, hey, Sally, don't hit so-and-so with a stick because otherwise you won't be able to get snacks. And she's like, okay. Yeah. So that's regret. Remorse is a deeper sense of regret. And with most psychologists and their definitions of it, it's that you feel empathetically bad for the other person. You weren't so far off. You made some critical errors when I put pressure on you, but you weren't so far off, Jacob. You follow? You couldn't frame it. You couldn't say it, but you had kind of a gut feeling in the same direction, didn't you? Yeah. Remorse isn't really about you. It's about the other person, how they feel. Now, if you feel remorse, will you feel regret? Yes. If you feel regret, you may not feel remorse. You follow? Remorse includes regret because it includes this idea that I made a mistake that had some negative repercussions. And that's regret. But it goes deeper than that because it's not about you. And that's why it's generally defined as a very deep sense of regret. It's a much more inclusive feeling of regret that includes the other person and how your actions affected them. And honestly, like a genuine selfless feeling of regret. Does regret necessarily include remorse? It does not, according to the definition I just gave, which is the kind of, I would say, the most popular definition in psychological circles. You could regret something because you lost your TV time, but not feel remorse because you don't feel for the other person. However, if you feel remorse, you will have a sense of regret that a mistake was made, that you should have done things differently, and so on and so forth. And that sense of regret will include the other person and their feelings. I've now repeated myself, I think 3 or 4 times. Do you guys understand what I've said? Okay. Good. That's great. All right. Remorse is what happens when good people make mistakes. When mature, brave, courageous people with a big heart make mistakes, they feel remorse. Now, what if you feel remorse and you just keep it inside, you don't do anything about it? You follow? Like I hit you with my car and I feel bad about it, but I never tell you and never do anything to make amends. I do a hit and run, but at home, I'm crying my eyes out for you. What do you think about the circumstance where someone feels remorse, but they don't do anything to rectify their mistakes? Yeah.
It becomes shame.
It becomes shame. I don't know. Could you apologize and say, I feel ashamed? Could you take responsibility for your actions and feel ashamed? Therefore, it doesn't really work, does it? If shame is only when you bottle something up and don't share it, then it wouldn't be possible to share something and feel ashamed. That was also a rhetorical question, by the way, for the same reasons as Jacob. What if you feel remorse? And we now know what remorse means. But you don't do anything about it. You don't try to make amends. It's rhetorical. What would you think about somebody who said to you they felt great remorse, but they never did anything to fix their mistakes? It's a rhetorical question. Do you know what that means? Rhetorical means it's a didactic tool. It's a device where I ask a question, but I don't actually want you to answer it. Don't worry, it doesn't seem that you're the only one who doesn't know what the term means. Anyway, chime in. Yes?
I just say it'd be dishonorable, and you feel, hopefully you feel like your integrity is at stake.
I don't know how you're answering my question. What would you think about somebody who told you at some point they felt great remorse, but they had never tried to make amends with you? Do you understand the rhetorical question now? I would think it wasn't really remorse. If you really feel remorse, you show it. You do something about it. You make amends. This, by the way, is why 2 of the 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous are about making amends, because it's how you really feel remorse. And if you really feel remorse, guess what happens? Rhetorical. Guess what happens? It's cathartic. It changes you. You grow from it. And you don't make the same mistakes again. Remorse is powerful. It's what happens when good people make mistakes, and it's how those good people grow and rectify their mistakes and become better people. And real remorse involves making amends. And if your feeling of regret doesn't move you to make amends, it's probably not remorse. It's more about you and not about the other person. And therefore you won't necessarily try to rectify things. But when that regret for a mistake that you made becomes strong enough in your heart, it changes you. It's not just about you. And you make amends and you express remorse. And it's healing. And the amazing thing is the other party doesn't even have to forgive you. You can feel remorse, make amends to the absolute best of your ability, get little to no acknowledgement from the other party, and still grow. And still heal. Does remorse go away? It's also rhetorical, but I want you guys to think about it. Does remorse go away? If you're a good person and you feel remorse, which is a sense of deep regret, it's not just about you, but it's about the other party that you've wronged, it's cathartic and it changes you and makes you better, does that remorse go away? Some people are nodding their heads yes, some are nodding their heads no. My opinion is that remorse never goes away. It's something you hold on to honor the person that you've wronged. You may heal, but I don't know, if you committed it, let's just make it real simple. Let's say you hit a child. Let's say you didn't kill them, let's just say you broke their leg. Let's say you were intoxicated. You hit a child, you broke their leg. You felt remorse, you turned yourself in. Kid forgave you, you made amends. You gave money for the kid's treatment. You wrote an apology. I'll go through how to make amends in a minute. But let's say you made a proper amends. Let's say the kid forgave you. Let's say you forgave yourself. Would your remorse, would your deep feeling of regret that you had done something to that person at some point in the past that caused them pain, would that go away? No. Remorse stays because if you give it up, you're shallow and you don't care. It's like you dishonor the other person's feeling. It's something you hold on to honor the other person's pain that you put them through. It also keeps you chaste and keeps you from making the same mistake in the future. But even long after you're not going to make that mistake anymore, you did something wrong that hurt somebody. Would a decent person feel bad about that forever? Sure. Does that mean you don't forgive yourself? It does not mean you don't forgive yourself. Does it mean you don't heal? Doesn't mean you don't heal. Can you heal and forgive yourself and also at the same time acknowledge you made a mistake and remember that? Yes. Do you understand, Liv? You're seeing it differently now, right? Remorse and regret. Remorse includes the other person's feeling. It's empathetic. Therefore, narcissists and sociopaths don't feel it. Regret's more general. It means you made a mistake that cost you something. Remorse is regret because it cost somebody else something. Real remorse makes you make amends because it's about the other person. So why would you keep your mouth shut? You follow? If you're not willing to do anything about it, it's not real remorse. Vishwanath, one of our theologians, says if you don't make amends for your mistakes and you just think, well, I'll just chant Hare Krishna and kind of do my own thing, then you get an extra offense, which is that you've hurt people on the strength of the holy name, and now you've just compiled, and you have compiling interest on your offenses because you've added a corrupt mentality to the whole thing. You guys follow this? You guys know what spiritual bypassing is? No, you don't. The New Yorker just published a cartoon about spiritual bypassing. Somebody sent it to me, thought it was all cool. I'm like, the New Yorker's a bunch of idiots. They don't know what spiritual bypassing is. Who thinks they know what spiritual bypassing is? You don't. We'll find out in a minute, though. I've put myself out there on a limb, and I'll take you at your word, but just for the purpose of moving forward. Most people think spiritual bypassing is when somebody got in a car accident and they're laying on the side of the road breathing, or bleeding to death, and you come by and you go, hey, do some pranayama. You follow? You're bypassing their pain and their suffering, and you're offering them a cheap spiritual solution while bypassing, just a hungry child is there, and you go, it's all karma, bro. While you're eating a sandwich. That's what most people think spiritual bypassing is. Is that what you thought spiritual bypassing was? How about you? Great. Then maybe you guys know what it is. That's what the New Yorker thought it was. It had 6 different things. Someone's falling off a cliff and they're like, it's all karma. And somebody else, they had a bunch of scenarios like this. All with sort of white Karens with a yoga slant. That's what was going on. So, being the antagonist in the comic, saying the unempathetic thing. You're spiritual and you bypass other people's suffering. That's not the term. The term was come up with by a guy named Wellwood in 1984 when he wrote a book. He's a transpersonal psychologist up in the Bay Area. Transpersonal psychology is when you shamelessly and straightforwardly work spiritual practice into your psychotherapy. So you're a psychiatrist, you're a psychologist, and you also at the same time straightforwardly, unapologetically incorporate spirituality into your therapy and advertise it as such. I know counselors and social workers and people who do hospice care, and they share with me how sad it is that they can't share their spirituality with people who are going through these huge moments in their life because it's unethical. Transpersonal psychology transcends that because it means you advertise yourself as a spiritualist and at the same time you have credentials. Do you guys follow this? A lot of times life coaches and so on and so forth, they're very poorly credentialed. It's almost like a way of avoiding going to school and getting credentialed for mental health. And transpersonal psychologists, psychiatrists, they take the trouble to go to school, get a master's degree or a PhD, and at the same time have their spiritual practice. He came up with the term spiritual bypassing to put a label on a phenomenon he saw in his practice, that he met people who hadn't dealt with a friend of mine called them his inner demons today. I was talking to a friend about his inner demons, or about his difficulties in life, and he was telling me, yeah, I'm working on my inner demons. Lifelong devotee, so it's not like he thinks there's a devil or there's truly evil people, but That's how he chose to call it. Transpersonal psychology was, and then there's a guy named Charles Whitfield, who's a big self-help guru. He wrote a book called Healing the Child Within, a super bestseller. He's like a real major best-selling author. In the 80s, 90s, and even now, he's a big guy. I think Wellwood just passed away a couple of years ago, if I remember correctly. And now his son is carrying on his legacy up in the Bay Area. But the term was used to refer to someone who escaped from working on themselves and their issues by wearing the armor of their spirituality. So they get good at, the externals of a spiritual practice. Like they get really good at doing handstands. But then they don't do the work on themselves that they should be doing. And they go on for years and years without having actually gutted themselves and growing. So the way spiritual bypassing is used nowadays on Instagram is when you bypass another's pain. The way this word spiritual bypassing was used from its inception over the last 30 years or so was when you bypass your own growth. Does that make sense? Generally on social media they have this understanding, but the actual understanding is the last one I gave. So Vishwanath, our theologian, said, if you don't make amends, you double your offenses. Essentially, 350 years ago, he was writing about spiritual bypassing. And that you have to go and make amends. It's part of your growth. That's why AA makes you do it twice. With your inventory and your amends. Even giving back, the 12th step is almost like a final amends where you give your life to a greater cause as a way of showing that you've truly healed. That's the mark of someone who's truly healed. You follow? I don't think the AA guys just happened on this. I think it's actually, they nailed it. So, regret, about you. Remorse, about the other person. Remorse means amends. Otherwise, it's not about the other person. Remorse doesn't go away. You can forgive yourself. You can heal. But the remorse is almost like a way of honoring the person who you wronged by holding on to your acknowledgement that you made a mistake. People who feel remorse don't feel a need to move on and forget the issue because it's about the other person who they hurt. And so guess who gets to decide when you move on? The other person. You follow? Generally when people apologize to me, I usually just poke at them a little bit. I like to forgive people. I like to have faith in people. I like to believe in people. I like to trust people. When somebody's wronged me and they make amends, I usually poke at their amends a little bit. About half the time, you know what happens to those amends? They evaporate. Turns into excuses and counter-blaming. Then you know it wasn't really an amends. You know? And it wasn't really an amends. What's a real amends? You know, you feel it. It's about you and your pain. Or it's about them and their pain. You follow? If they're making amends with you, you know it because it's about you. And when you're giving amends to somebody, when you're making amends with somebody, it's about them. Do you guys follow this? That's the selflessness of remorse. Now, how do you make amends? You apologize. What's a good apology consist of? Our scriptures are filled with them. What's a good apology look like? You appreciate the other person. That's step one. You appreciate all the good in the other person. Not fake good, real good. Spend your time appreciating the person you want to make amends with. Genuinely appreciating the person. Not in a flattering way, not in a generic way, but really dig in about what's good in that person. What you respect and admire and appreciate and value in that person. And start with that. Then, you recount your mistake in full detail without missing anything. Shamelessly. You lay it out, what you did. Then you tell the person what you were thinking when you did it. So they understand where you were at. You tell them what you were thinking, even if what you were thinking was really bad. You follow? Like, oh, and I cut you off in the car. I was hoping you would drive off the bridge and die. Or when I cut you off in the car, I wasn't really even conscious. I was intoxicated. I didn't even know what I was doing. It's important for the person to understand what you were thinking so they understand the cognitive component of what you did to them. Usually you're apologizing for a behavior. But when you let them into your cognition, they now have the whole picture. Sometimes it makes your crime lesser, sometimes it makes your crime worse. It doesn't matter, because when you're making amends, it's about honesty. It's about truth. It's about reestablishing and reconciling and rebuilding a relationship which starts off with honestly assessing where things were broken and how you messed things up. You follow? Then you express remorse. Then you apologize. Then you pay for your mistake by remunerating them, whatever that might look like. If you vilify them behind their back, then you glorify them. If you stole from them, then you pay them back and then some. You, to the best of your ability, fix what you did wrong, even if it costs you a lot. That way they know you're not trying to get away with anything. You follow? They know you're not trying to hide anything. They know you're not trying to gloss anything over. They know you're not trying to get away with anything. You follow? And you change, so you'll never make that mistake again. I was talking to a friend of mine. He had numerous DUIs in his life. And he had made a lot of mistakes in his life. Cost him a marriage, cost him custody of his kids. This isn't like light stuff, big stuff. He's been sober a couple of years now. I was talking to him about his life. And we were doing some work together. I was offering him some assistance. And he said to me, he goes, I always knew I had good in me. He said, but now the last 2 years, I've spent externalizing that good. And making that be who I really am. You follow? That's kind of the last step. You become a better version of yourself so that you never make those mistakes again. And the person can trust you. That's a reconciliation, which is different than forgiveness. Forgiveness is you let go of some pain or some resentment towards a person, some anger towards a perceived mistreatment. A reconciliation is a rebuilding of trust in a relationship. They're not the same. They're not synonymous. Just like forgetting isn't forgiving. It just means you've forgotten it. You don't remember it. Pardoning someone is a legal term. Excusing someone means you don't hold them accountable because they're not capable of being held accountable. Condoning something is you saying, hey, you didn't do anything wrong. Forgiving them is to let go of the pain and anger and to wish well upon the person. Reconciling is to rebuild trust in a relationship. Amends and remorse are about more than forgiveness. They're about making the changes sufficient for a reconciliation to occur. And that involves dealing with the problem. It also involves doing a bunch of work in your off time. It involves dealing with the person you've wronged, but it also involves doing a bunch of work on your own so you become a better version of yourself. And those mistakes won't occur again. Thus, remorse is cathartic. It's healing. It's transformative. It's growth. It's how you make mistakes in life and become a better person for them. Instead of mistakes in life and trying to forget about them or cover them up or hide them or ignore them or bypass them or whatever else people do. How was that for a 30-minute analysis? Regret about you, remorse about the other person. Remorse includes regret. Regret doesn't necessarily include remorse. Real remorse means amends. Amends mean you appreciate the person, you outline what you did wrong, and your psychology when you did that thing wrong, and you apologize, and you remunerate them and fix it, and you change. So that a reconciliation can occur. And when you make that kind of amends, that even if the other party doesn't forgive you, it doesn't matter because you've changed. It's like you know you're never going to do that to them again. And you hold on to that feeling of remorse because that's a way to honor that person and make it clear that you're not trying to get out of something. Did you guys follow all that? Okay. That was my quick class for today. Remorse is powerful. Remorse will change the world. And right off the bat, it'll change you. Only brave, courageous, strong people can feel remorse. Broken people can't do it. They can't put their foot in the abyss. They can't go into that because it's too scary. Because they have such, honestly, people have a broken sense of self. They can't go into it because they think they're a piece of shit anyway and they spend their whole lives covering it up. That's like hidden truth about narcissists. And so they can't ever go down that road because they go down that road, they're never going to come back up because they spent their whole life trying not to feel these kind of deep feelings. Because they were so brutalized as a child that they can't feel these feelings and breathe. They can't feel these feelings and move forward. They can't feel these feelings and have any trust or faith in themselves. So they avoid this. People with high self-esteem and high sense of self-worth, they can admit their faults and make amends and peer into the abyss without having the abyss peer back into them. And they can, which is something Nietzsche said, and they can make amends. Amends are powerful. They're for brave people. They're for courageous people. Krishna says that when his devotees, when his bhaktas fall short of their spiritual values and fail in their vows, they should feel remorse and continue to happily serve him. It's interesting because remorse and being happy are not seen as antonyms for Krishna. And that through continuing to engage in service and feeling remorse, that fire of remorse burns up whatever was done wrong. One of our theologians made this point. The fire of remorse burns up the sin, burns up the crime, burns up the foul mentality that led to the crime in the first place. It's edifying. It's curative. It's like the sun. It disinfects. Okay. Comments? Discussion? Loud.
I really appreciated this class, and it made me think that growth from being regretful to remorseful is a nice gauge where you can look at something maybe in the past you felt regretful about, but now looking back at it, you actually feel remorse because you realize you should have done something different.
Nick, did you hear that? Okay. Yeah, what a nice point. Maybe you only felt regret because you're a closet narcissist. But then you grow up and you become an adult because you don't have the disorder. And you grow up and now you can look back on what you used to feel regret for and you can actually feel remorse for it. And so you can revisit things in your life. And it's not that you've missed that opportunity forever. You can go back and make amends now. What a great point. Nice point. Good stuff. More? Yeah.
I really appreciate your point of saying that you can hang on to remorse, which is good, and yet still forgive yourself. I think I've gotten those two things confused, like I needed to hold on to both in order to really be remorseful, for lack of a better word.
Did you guys hear that? Nick, give me a thumbs up if you heard that. Okay. Yeah, you can feel remorse and forgive yourself. You can feel remorse and be happy. You can feel remorse and have faith in yourself. You can feel remorse and move forward. People think you can't, and therefore they torture themselves perpetually in unhealthy ways, which become like a victim mentality, woe is me, which is just reverse narcissism. Or they are afraid of feeling remorse, and therefore they don't go down that rabbit hole because they don't know how to navigate it. Right? Yeah, I think that's an important thing for people to notice. And I mentioned that like a few times from a few different angles. You're correct. It was something I was really trying to communicate. That's good. I think a lot of people conflate those things and confuse them. Loud.
I wanted to appreciate how you pointed out in the scriptures that there's a template for making amends, and how there's that critical step where you glorify the person that you wronged. And I didn't know, I missed that before. So
Indra does this with Krishna. After he sends the Samvarta clouds, he approaches Krishna, glorifies him, and admits his fault and asks for forgiveness. And Krishna tells him, be happy and do your service, but don't make this mistake again. So Krishna's even like, that was what Krishna was concerned with, was his growth from the experience. That's what we're all concerned with. If you look in your heart, you'll find this is what you're looking for when someone makes amends with you. You'll find this is what you're looking for when someone makes amends with you. And so obviously it's what you should give when you're making amends with somebody else. People just don't spend the time to think this stuff through. I try to make amends. Always. I make it a point to apologize to people, to point out what I did, why I did it, to make commitments to not doing it again, and to paying for my mistakes and changing. And it's illuminating, And I think it's an untapped resource for most people. And I think most people want to live a life without regret or remorse. And they conflate these things and are confused about them. They haven't spent the time to think about them. And I normally think it's because it takes some depth. And it's too scary for most people. So they see it as toxic and try to just avoid it instead of realizing what an elixir it can actually be and what a powerful tonic it can be and how curative it can be. How good it is for the world and for yourself. Linda, the remorse that lacks action to fix what's been done, that's not really remorse. That reminds me of the kind of guilt that paralyzes people. It seems to me like a really wasted opportunity. Yeah, paralyzing guilt sometimes is just like people need to be unstuck and they need to be told it's okay, we can move forward. And it's almost like a post-traumatic stress disorder kind of thing. The lack of remorse, maybe a little bit of that too, but I always felt like the lack of remorse was just you haven't really felt bad about it. Like you don't really feel bad. You may lack in your ability to feel empathy. The paralyzing guilt for me is a little more consistent with a person being healthy but just really immature. The inability to feel remorse is hopefully just that. And like Mason said, it's just about growing up. But some people have an almost pathological inability to feel remorse. And that gets dangerous. There is a way through it. There is a way through it. They found that people who take care of small animals in prison, violent criminals who are given small animals, cats and dogs to take care of, that their ability to feel remorse for their crimes and their ability to feel empathy increases. It's kind of a burgeoning new field where people who are otherwise being written off as having low capacity for empathy are undergoing almost like magical transformations as a result of being engaged in caring for and nurturing other people. Now I understand why some connections are never truly mended, even after an apology has been given. Because the source of the apology was regret, not remorse. This brings a sense of peace and empathy. That brings a sense of peace and empathy. This brings you a sense of peace and empathy. Yeah, it could also be the other person can't forgive you, Young. But then that'll also be okay. And you've done everything you can do, and the door is always open for you to do more, and you're ready, willing, and able to do as much as is required to make amends, and that person can do with that what they want to. And maybe the other party needs to grow up. So it might not be this like a kumbaya moment and everything's great, but at least you've done everything within your power, and you'll find peace in that. You'll be able to sleep peacefully at night while feeling remorseful. Do you follow? Great. One more, and then we'll call it. Yes. Loud.
Would you say that, or would you think that Arjuna is a good example of a spiritual bypass or attempted spiritual bypass?
I don't know. I mean, it just depends on how you view Arjun. Arjun is divinely beguiled by Krishna so that Krishna can instruct the world. Arjun is kripa avishta. He's entered into a feeling of compassion towards people. He was klaibya. He was weak. So either A, Arjuna was weak, B, Arjuna was compassionate, or C, Arjuna was divinely beguiled by Krishna simply to teach a lesson. You follow? Therefore, to answer your question, we'd have to decide on which version of Arjuna we wanted to embrace, and then we could answer your question. Does that make sense? And Arjuna went to Krishna like 5 minutes in and took shelter, so he wasn't bypassing anything.
Like maybe he was thinking,
for a moment? Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Like I said, it's Arjuna's mindset is meant to help us with our own mindsets. But if we try to put Arjuna into a single box, it becomes problematic because he's a multivalent personality who has multiple layers that are simultaneously present in him that teach a number of lessons. And so maybe part of him could be seen as doing that, right? Something like that? Why not? Why not? Sure, you can go with that. Anything else? Loud. No, don't try. I don't want to have to be your servant and repeat everything you say.
Okay. I really appreciate that you're teaching us this. I've never heard of anybody teaching remorse in this way before. There's other communications classes where they teach how to apologize, but they never talk about remorse. So I really appreciate that. And I actually went through this with you because for most of my life I thought it was okay to just brush things under the rug. But you taught me to feel remorseful and then apologize. And I did that recently with you. And things to help out the girls at the ashram because I talked to them about it. They're like, "You haven't apologized yet for that?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't." And then so they encouraged me to apologize to you for what I did 5 years ago. 5 years later, and then he also taught me to how to fix the situation. And so I really appreciate this class a lot.
Yeah, I'm a bit stunned by what you said. It was very beautiful, and it shows a lot of growth on your part. Which is everything for me. Seeing the people that I'm interacting with and helping to care for, grow, and become deeper and more full adults, spiritual adults, is everything for me. And so I'm real humbled by what you said, and I'm impressed. And you've made such advancement in your life over the last few years, and even over the last year. I find it to be really inspiring. And what you said here is kind of made my year. That's what I live for, helping people to grow. And it happened to be that I was the person you made amends with. But and that, of course, that just makes it sweeter because I got a chance to reconcile with you. But seeing you make those moves as a teacher, seeing you make those moves with anybody, does me proud, gives me faith, and inspires me. Does that make sense? All right. Let's call it there. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, Mickey.